In this video article, we're going to talk about how to generate consistent story ideas. Now, story ideas and ideation, something that I'm doing quite a bit of work on at the moment. That's in response to a student question and series of questions from a student in my writing vault. And in this video article, we're going to talk about the kind of thing that you can do that basically sets up your foundations for giving your subconscious brain ideas that can then be turned into stories. Now, before we get into that, if you want to get an email with a timestamped overview every time I release a new video like this, then head over to my website deliberate-practice.com. You can sign up for my email list there. There's other content at the website, plus in the weeks and months to come there will be email subscriber only content as a thank you for signing up. The first piece of that went live last week, which was the 10 question overview. If you saw the videos I've done, two so far, there's another one coming this week on the 10 question method. There's a workflow that you can paste into your own AI, whatever AI you prefer to use, and then you can get the AI to ask you questions, and basically you can brainstorm ideas, and all the AI does is it prompts you based on the workflow with a series of questions that you answer, and that will start to give you more information on your stories, because you'll come up with creative answers and go, well, if I've got to do that, then this person could do that, and blah, blah, etc, etc. Go and watch the other two videos. They'll be put on the end screen with recommended videos, so you can go and check them out there as well, or watch this through to the end and then click from there. So this video is based on ideas by a guy called James Webb Young, and he produced a book. You can see one of the covers there. The book's called A Technique for Producing Ideas. Was first published in 1940, I think. A long while ago. James Webb Young was initially an advertising executive, and he had some interesting and innovative ideas on how you could lay the foundation so that you could always come up with ideas. And his ideas and his methodology can be adapted for storytellers, and that's what we're going to look at today. So the big problem that every writer faces is, where do you get your ideas? Question that most authors get asked by aspiring fiction writers, and it's the question that they hate the most. I've talked about this before in previous videos. The concept that waiting for inspiration to strike as a method for generating story ideas is poor, it's unreliable, and it's frustrating. And it has a flawed assumption built into that, and that assumption is that creativity is pure inspiration, and there's no system behind it, and no way of tapping into that on a much more regular basis. Now, Webb Young discovered that idea production follows a predictable process, and you can use that process and adapt it to generate story ideas consistently as well. So Webb Young said, ideas are like coral islands, and I really like this metaphor. He says they appear suddenly but are built slowly, and you can create an assembly line process that will help support your creativity in coming up with ideas. And by practicing this and practicing coming up with ideas, it makes you better at producing creative ideas on demand. Webb Young said there are two types of people: idea speculators, idea rentiers. And speculators are people who are a bit like entrepreneurs. They come up with ideas by combining 2, 3, 4, 5 new concept or 5 existing concepts into new ways. And rentiers are much more conservatively minded people who don't come up with ideas themselves, but do their work based on ideas that other people have come up with. And if you're going to be an author, you need to be an idea speculator. You need to be not waiting for other people to come up with things and then modeling them, but coming up with new ideas. And in rereading Young's book in preparation for this video article, I was struck by the fact that lots of entrepreneurial people that I know also wish to be fiction writers, and there's some kind of strange connection going on there in terms of how entrepreneurs work, in terms of creating new businesses and new products by coming up with interesting ideas, by combining existing things in new ways is very similar to how fiction writers do the same with story ideas. So there's an interesting connection there. Webb Young had two essential principles. Number one, ideas are a combination of old and existing elements. And number two, you constantly need to search for new relationships between existing facts or existing elements. And basically, every story is a fresh pattern made from new combinations of existing elements. You rarely get a story where something totally new and radical is produced. So if you think of story ideas as being simply fresh combinations of existing elements, then it makes the process a bit more understandable. The more elements that you collect in your library of ideas, library of elements, the more potential combinations you have that become possible. And Webb Young had a metaphor he called the kaleidoscope metaphor, which was your brain was like a kaleidoscope, and if you remember seeing a kaleidoscope, I'm sure you can probably get some kind of app that mimics what a kaleidoscope does now. But you have all these pieces in there and you jumble them up and it makes new patterns, and that's exactly what he's talking about. You get as many elements into your mental kaleidoscope as possible, and that can be jumbled up and give you multiple story combinations or an unlimited amount of story combinations. So he had a 5-stage process. Stage 1 was gather your materials. So there's 2 types of materials you need to gather. One are specific materials. So for story writers, if you're working in 1 or 2 genres, you need to know your genre, you need to read in your genre, collect the things that you might think of as obligatory scenes, and know your audience, what their expectations are, what they like to see. If you're writing for like an Agatha Christie style audience, and suddenly you have serial killers jumping out from behind a curtain and mercilessly slaying some of the protagonists of the story or some of the characters in the story, you're going to turn that audience off. So you need to know what your audience expectations are, as well as knowing what elements form your genre in terms of what kind of characters, what kind of plots, how they unfold, what kind of level of violence is acceptable, or swearing, or all that kind of thing. So you need to collect those materials, and mostly you'll do that by, and we'll talk more about this later in the video, by reading, watching great movies, watching great TV series. Those are the 3 primary ways to collect those things. And then there's what Webb Young calls general materials, which is everything else, and they all become potential story fuel. So this can range from seeing people acting in a strange way in your town, or watching or reading non-fiction about various subjects and going, oh, that would be interesting, put into this kind of story possibility. So you need to purposely go out and collect those materials as well. And Webb Young says you need to foster the habit of insatiable curiosity. So if you see a documentary about someone who did something that was unusual, and normally people who have documentaries made about them have done something unusual, ask yourself, why would they have done that? What could have happened to them to have set them on that path that they ended up doing whatever the subject of the documentary is? And by asking those questions, you start to touch upon human psychology, why people do things, and understanding those elements and asking why certain people will do certain types of things will really help with your story development in terms of how characters behave in believable ways. So to do try and foster that habit of curiosity, asking yourself, why would someone have done such a thing as that? What could have led them? What childhood experiences might have led them down that path? And do spend some time examining the materials that you're gathering and asking yourself questions of it. Webb Young says develop some kind of notebook or scrapbook to collect all your interesting ideas and thoughts. In the digital age, remember this was first done in 1940, it could be some kind of Notion document. There are the whole strand of personal knowledge personal knowledge management is quite out there at the moment. It's quite trendy. Concepts like Zettelkastens, hope I pronounced that right, that kind of thing. So you could have some kind of digital way of collecting all these different pieces of information. The thing where Zettelkasten system might be interesting is if you have it set up in certain pieces of software, it can throw up interesting connections that you perhaps have never thought of. So do spend some time trying to work out a system that works for you, but don't get obsessed with it so that your time spent on trying to find the perfect system rather than filling that system with materials that will support your ideas and stories to come down the line. Stage 2, mental games. Look for connections between seemingly unrelated elements. Remember I said that stories and ideas are new ways of combining existing elements. So if you see a documentary about a guy who was an inventor and he became an inventor by doing exactly this process, see how you can model that for stories. So take and you can actually make a game of it if you've got, and depending on how you collect your information that we talked about in the previous slide, if you've got that in some kind of digital format, you could use it some kind of randomizer so it throws up an event. Maybe it's an historical event that you've made a note about with a person, and it can come from anything and led to this, and you can get 3 or 4 elements and go, well, how could those 3 or 4 elements be connected? What causal connections could exist that could make these things happen? And start doing things like that, and it's what it does. You may come up with an idea and go, oh, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if that could turn into a story. So you may come up with something that becomes a germ of a story, or you may come up with an interesting character combination plus event that you that's not quite fully developed there. I'll develop that in future. But try different combinations. One thing you can do, take a story you've seen that you really liked, swap out the main character for someone totally different, and see how the story now plays out. So for example, let's say you're watching Silence of the Lambs, for example, and instead of Clarice Starling, you've got 70-year-old retired detective. How does Silence of the Lambs now play out? Or that kind of story. Don't make it Silence of the Lambs. Take Silence of the Lambs and strip it down to its essential combinations, and now how does it play out if the person investigating the serial killer is a 70-year-old retired detective? Or maybe it's a 70-year-old retired detective who believes he's Sherlock Holmes. Just have fun with these ideas, and see where they lead you, and make detailed notes of any partial ideas that emerge, because they may grow into and expand into more interesting, fully fleshed out concepts that you can build a story on. But play some games, be playful. The whole point of Webb Young's concepts are that you have lots of different pieces of existing information, whether it's characters, whether it's story types, whether it's story models, whether it's situations, whether it's events, whether it's the killer gets caught but escapes. And by asking yourself questions and trying out swapping in different things, you come up with new ways of looking at stories and potentially new story ideas. Stage 3, give the boys in the basement time to do their work. Now, Scott Young wouldn't have used the phrase boys in the basement. That's a metaphor that Stephen King uses, and what he means is That's the subconscious mind. You feed it with information and let it filter around and swirl around, and then wait for the boys in the basement to combine different things. And sometimes you'll be walking along, we'll talk about this in the next slide too, and you'll get an idea and go, wow, bang, I've got a fully fledged idea. But if you've watched a documentary, let's say, about an interesting historical detective, let's say it was whoever Conan Doyle modelled Sherlock Holmes on, if he did, or it's a documentary about Sherlock Holmes, and you've got that idea of a mastermind detective, don't expect to start writing a story based on that idea the next day. Put the ideas in your brain, write them down, put them into your note system, however you're doing that, and maybe in the future the boys in the basement will do their thing, and they will work their magic and put some part of that idea into a story idea for you. Also, look for activities in your life where ideas suddenly crop up. When it starts happening, when you start getting a story idea, and also the other thing which I don't think I've documented on these slides, you always need to have some kind of either notebook or something on your phone where you can stop and go and take notes with you at all times, because as you start doing this more, you'll start getting ideas in unlikely places. And what you want to be looking for is what activities do you do where ideas do suddenly crop up. So for me, driving is one. Now, the driving has to have specific parameters in place. I did a video on this called something like how to defeat writer's block, the Steven Spielberg method. I'll put a link to that in the end screen of this video as well, but you can go and look for that on the channel. But often when I'm doing solo long distance motorway driving, I nearly always will get one or two really interesting ideas. Sometimes walking will do the same. Some people have said they get ideas when they're walking, but look for ideas, and usually those ideas have the following look for activities where you suddenly find ideas cropping up, and the common elements in the situations where this happens are: you're doing something physical, so your body is occupied, but it's not something physical that requires your conscious mind to be constantly focused. So it's not like if you're a carpenter and you're sawing pieces of wood into specific lengths and working on a saw. It's not that kind of activity. It's something where the activity is repetitive and doesn't require the conscious brain to be focused to do it. So when you're driving on the motorway, you get in the slow lane at 70 miles an hour, and bang, you're just going along. Your conscious brain doesn't need to do anything, and it doesn't go to sleep, but it kind of just drifts away a bit, and that gives the unconscious brain time to go, okay, now we're going to do something. And I found doing that I've had some great ideas from driving. As I say, walking, but it may be different for you. Some people find they have great ideas when they're in the shower. So again, that's a physical activity, doesn't require the conscious brain to do much, and it gives a chance for the unconscious brain to slip in and go, oh, by the way, we've been working on this, and here is a great idea for you. So look for the activities where this happens for you, and you'll only know when you start filling the tank, filling the well with material that the boys in the basement can work from. And then when you start getting ideas, the first thing to do is write down as much detail of the idea as you can there and then. When you've got that notated down and gone, wow, that is a really interesting idea, I'm really looking forward to working with that, before you close the book on that, draw a line underneath it if you're writing in a physical book, and then go, here's the activity I was doing, here's everything that was going on, and write down what that was, so that you can create an idea diary that not only has the idea you came up with, but has the activity you were doing when the idea came up, so that sometime in the future you can go back when you've generated 30 or 40 ideas like this, and you can take all the activity notes you've made, and you can upload them to AI and say, here's 30 ideas. These are the activities I was doing that generated 30 ideas. Look for the common denominators between them, or you can look through and find out. And then you can find the activities that you can do that will be most likely to generate good ideas out of the blue. And so that's a really important thing to take away from doing this process. Is sometimes it might be driving, sometimes it might be walking, but find an activity that produces ideas for you when you're not consciously trying to create an idea, and do that activity more times in your life. Schedule more time to do it. If it's something like walking or cycling, and you're getting a fitness benefit as well, then that's fantastic. Also, the other thing for me that helps is I use AI workflows to prompt me with questions that are designed to elicit story ideas, and I find that given the right stimulus from that, in connection with the things that we're going to talk about in terms of gathering materials, we've talked a bit about it, we're going to talk more as well, that can generate really interesting ideas too. So stage 4 of Webb Young's 5-stage process is the eureka moment. This is when ideas appear when you least expect them, and if you do the things that we've talked about already, so collect information, give that information time to work in your subconscious, let the boys in the basement work on it, you will start to find you have moments where suddenly ideas, and they may not be great to start with, but suddenly ideas will start to appear when you least expect them. And the more that you build your mental kaleidoscope, the more you'll start to get really detailed ideas. I have this happen to me on a regular basis, and I'm sure I've told this story on a previous video, maybe the Spielberg writer's block video that I mentioned earlier. But for me, the most detailed and vivid idea like this that ever came to me was I was driving from where I then lived, this was in the 90s, which was in the Midlands of the UK, to the French Alps. And when you get to Calais, which is this was before the Eurotunnel, so that's how long ago it was. When you come off the boat to Calais, it's about an 11 to 12 hour drive to get from Calais to the French Alps. So drove down to Paris, 2-hour drive, listened to some music, yeah, that's cool. Had the joy of getting around the périphérique, which is the road that goes around Paris. If you remember the kids show Wacky Races, if ever there was a road that was the wacky races in real life, it's the périphérique. Then got onto the motorway that goes south to Lyon. 5 hours of just motorway, barely any cars on it, same scenery for 5 hours, and somewhere along that 5 hour stretch, 4 hour, 5 hour, whatever it is, from Paris to Lyon, I got this idea for a fantasy novel. It just in massive detail. I got the main character, the reason he was in the story, different religions, different magic systems, what happens at the end, number of the side characters, some of the subplots. I mean, when I got to where I was going, I met my friends and I said, listen, I'm sorry, I need to go and write some stuff down. And I was writing for over an hour, and I still haven't written this bloody story. It'd be 150,000 word epic fantasy, but very classic epic fantasy, and that's one of my big goals, and one of the reasons I started the Writing Vault, which I'll tell you more about at the end, was to make me write more regularly, to build my writing process, to improve my writing chops, so I can get this story into the world. Anyway, when you've built your kaleidoscope, these kind of things will happen to you. when you get an idea, don't immediately judge it. Write it down, let it simmer. The act of writing it down, what's the word? Makes it concrete, and then you can look at it again and go, okay, well, what about if this? And then you can build on it. And what you'll find is your subconscious will develop the idea further. The idea that I've just told you about, the other day I was walking the dog, we were on a road walk, and suddenly I got a little piece that solved one of the problems that I'm having in putting that into a fully fleshed out outline, and it came out of nowhere. So you'll still be building the idea. Make sure you're capturing all the things you get. Stage 5. Webb-Young calls this reality testing your idea. Now, he suggests sharing your idea with others for their input. Remember, he wasn't talking about stories, and I know writers are very sensitive about their story ideas for multiple reasons. I don't think you should take your idea unless you've got like a core group of either fellow writers whose opinions and insights you trust, or you've got a core group of readers and you speak to them. Instead, what I would recommend is that you take a set of story questions. That could be Gary Provo's 8 story questions. Done a video on that. Or the hero's journey. If it's a short story, it could be the 5-step minimum viable hero's journey. If it's a longer story, it could be the more fully fleshed out hero's journey. If there's a different story model that you like, use that story model. But take those the story model questions, put your story idea through it, and see how your idea stacks up when you do that. Because sometimes you get an idea and then you go, oh, do you know what? It's an interesting premise, but it doesn't flesh out at this point to a full story idea, and that does sometimes happen. So if you saw the previous video I did, which was the live case study, where I went through the story and the 10 story questions with a situation, the character and the situation. So the character, a female cat burglar, and the situation was stealing a supernatural object from someone who was effectively like a Voldemort or a wizard. I'd had that idea several years ago, but it just never stacked up. It was only when I combined it with the plot twist that I mentioned in that previous video that suddenly it became a viable story, and a much more interesting story too. So sometimes you'll get things and you may not use them for several years, and they may end up, that piece may end up as a side part of another story. That's perfectly normal and natural. But this is a good way to check and see if you've got a viable story idea. So let's talk about building your kaleidoscope. Now, this is similar to the kind of recommendations for writers that Ray Bradbury made and that other writers make as well. Create a diet for yourself of great stories. That can be books, movies, TV series, plays, etc. Go beyond your genre interests, so you don't just want to read in your principal genre or genres if you write in multiple genres. Read, watch great things in other genres. And then add in other subjects you're interested in. For me, history and psychology are two that I like to look at. History is a great way of finding plot events that you can go, okay, how about if I took that idea and put it in contemporary London or something like that. And in fact, if you saw any of the videos I did on my favourite writers, my favourite writer is a historical fantasist called Guy Gavriel Kay, and what he does is he takes historical events and puts them into his own imagined universe. So obviously I like his writing, he's my favourite writer, so obviously I like to do a similar thing. And psychology, I find if you can find the right kind of psychology material, it can help you develop better insights into human behaviour, which helps you create richer characters. Webb-Young suggests when you've done all this, you have some kind of 3x5. He suggests 3x5-inch index cards for capturing all your ideas. He suggests scheduling regular idea gathering time. and he suggests build habits that feed your creative reservoir daily. All of these things are, you can see, hear, read in the work of other people when they talk about this. I mentioned you might not want to do 3x5 index cards, you might want to do some kind of digital note-taking system. Find something that works for you. Find a way of doing this stuff regularly. So I make sure, and especially in the winter, I read 2 hours a night in the winter, and I read fiction pretty much exclusively, but I do keep an eye on the papers and the news for ideas. But my one caveat that I'd suggest with looking at the newspapers is realizing that the newspapers aren't always reporting factually. Often they're news, and it doesn't matter which side of the political divide you're on, whether you're left or right in inverted commas. If you're reading the media that you like, be aware that the other side in inverted commas has a different take on it. So I tend to think of myself as being reasonably centrist in terms of politics, so I read a left-wing paper and a right-wing paper, and if there's a story I really like, thinking of, oh, that's an interesting event, I wonder, I stop reading the minute the idea interests me and start thinking about it away from what a reporter who has a political bias that maybe I don't share has, so that the idea, I can try and get to the core of the idea without anyone else's biases influencing that idea. But whatever you do and however you do it, you need to do it on a regular basis. You need to be watching, reading quality material, both fictional and non-fictional. Ray Bradbury said, before you go to bed, read a short story, read a poem, read a non-fiction essay. That would work, but find a way that works for you and that you can do on a persistent and consistent basis. Webyoung says, trust the process. Ideas will come if you follow the system. And basically what he's saying is, if you build your mental kaleidoscope, whatever metaphor you use, I like to think about it as filling the well. You've got material to draw from that when you and that material is both non-fictional and fictional. Remember, stories are new combinations of existing things, and your imagination will put your own slant on combining new idea or existing ideas into new ways. So the more of those pieces of information you've got in your reservoir or your well or your kaleidoscope, however you want to think about it, the more your creative muscle has got to draw upon. Okay, so summing up, every writer's process is unique, but the concept of gathering raw materials by reading, watching lots of stories and non-fiction is very common advice. The biggest takeaway from Young's ideas for me are building your mental kaleidoscope, whatever mental model or mental representation you want to use for this, whether it's a mental kaleidoscope, whether it's filling the tanks, filling the well, which is my one. Come up with a concept that you go, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and start doing that. And then ideas as new combinations of existing ideas, or stories rather, as new combinations of existing ideas. So that for me is a really interesting way of looking at story ideas. So you're never looking at coming up with something completely and 100% original. It's always built on the hundreds and thousands of years of literature and ideas that we have been exposed to in terms of myths, legends, childhood stories. Then from when we were slightly older, we all started reading fiction, watching TV, watching movies. All of those things exist in your reservoir or your kaleidoscope already, and some of those ideas will be things that you are really striking to you, and there are ways you can deliberately set about looking for what they are. That's beyond the scope of this video. But you've already got that, and then you can build upon that by watching new movies, reading new books, finding new non-fictional ideas, whether it's history, psychology, or anthropology, physics, whatever it is that floats your boat. Do read outside your comfort zone, in inverted commas, and look to build your reservoir, your mental kaleidoscope, your tank with as much information as possible. Now, in closing out, I think, as well as doing the kind of thing that Scott Young's talked about, writers need to develop a way of creating new ideas daily. And in the next video, following on from this, I'm going to look at a book called Become an Idea Machine, which was written by a guy called James Altucher, and I'm going to look at that through the lens of writers. Now, if the kind of thing we've been talking about here is interesting to you, you're an aspiring, frustrated, new, wannabe fiction writer, I'm putting a resource together that will be perfect for you when it's finished. The truth is, it'll actually never be finished. It will just get bigger and bigger and bigger. I've been developing it for a while, and I just started the job this week of cataloguing it properly, and that will take 2 or 3 months. But as that process goes on, it will become easier and easier to find material, and there's lots of great material there for you. Check the link out and go and see where we're at already. Have a look, see what you think. If you've got any questions about it, you can email me. Paul@deliberate-practice is the best way to get in touch with me. You can leave a comment on the videos, but now I've got over 70 videos on the channel, so finding individual comments becomes interesting, to say the least. YouTube doesn't have a simple way of really making it clear and obvious for me as the creator to reply to questions. And then if it's a new question, there is a way of getting to it quite quickly, but if I then reply and then you reply with further questions, it's very hard for me to see that. So email is much better. So do go and check the Writing Vault out. The description will be in the link. The link to it will be in the description below this YouTube video. And if you've got questions, email me with that email address. Thank you for watching this, and I'll catch you in the next video. And before I go, here are some recommended videos from my channel that you might want to check out.